education secretaries that we've ever had. Arnie Duncan. We also have your Congresswoman, Federica Wilson, is here. Give her a big round. Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz is here. Your outstanding school superintendent, Alberto Carvalho. And a very, very impressive principal, Renita Turner. By another champion of education reform, somebody who championed reform when he was in office, somebody who is now championing reform as a private citizen, Jeb Bush. Aside from being a former governor of this great state, Jeb, of course, is best known as the brother of Marvin Bush. Back in Washington, back in the day. The truth is, I got to know Jeb because his family exemplifies public service, and we are so grateful to him for the work that he's doing on behalf of education. I just had a chance to take a tour here at Miami Central. I talked to some of the great students who are here. We went through a lab. They had robots, they had computers, vectors, and this and that. And I was a little confused, but I nodded, pretending like I was. And it's inspiring to think about where you were just a few years ago, and then where you are today. Came together to turn this school around. And I think the rest of us can learn something from that, because that's what we're going to need to do all across the country right now. We are at a pivotal turning point. We just came through a tough recession. It's taken a big toll on families here in Florida and all across the country. And to accelerate our recovery in the short term, we took some essential steps to spur hiring and economic growth, including tax cuts that are making Americans' paychecks bigger and letting businesses write off their investments. Excuse me. And I am proud that Republicans and Democrats came together to get that done. And you're already seeing those steps make a difference. This morning we learned that the unemployment rate fell to its lowest level in nearly 2 years. Our economy added another 222,000 jobs in the private sector. That's the 12th straight month of private sector job growth. So our economy's now added 1.5 million private sector jobs over the last year. And that's progress. means answering some difficult questions. How do we attract new jobs? How do we attract new businesses? How do we attract new industries to our shores? How do we grow our economy and out-compete countries around the world? How do we make sure all of you, all of our students, whether they go to Miami Central or any place else, how do we make sure you have a chance at the American dream? And that's why I'm here today. That's what I want to talk to you about. Because in today's economy, companies are making decisions about where to locate and who to hire based on a few key factors. They're looking for faster, more reliable transportation and communications networks, like high-speed railroads, high-speed internet. They're looking for a commitment to innovation and investments in basic research so the companies can profit from new ideas and new discoveries. But most of all, the single most important thing companies are looking for are highly skilled, highly educated workers. That's what they're looking for. More than ever before, companies hire where the talent is. Now, I want all the young people here to listen, because over the next 10 years, nearly half of all new jobs are going to require a level of education that goes beyond a high school degree. So first of all, you can't drop out. You can't even think about dropping out. But it's not going to be enough just to graduate from high school. You're going to need some additional education. And a good education equals a good job. If we want more good news on the jobs front, then we've got to make more investments in education. As a nation, making these investments in education, in innovation, in infrastructure, all of them are essential. Now, what makes it tough is that we're in a difficult fiscal situation as well. For too long, the government's been spending more than it takes in. So in order to make sure we can keep doing our part to invest in Miami Central, to invest in your schools, to invest in Cal Grants, to invest in your education, and we're also going to have to get serious about cutting whatever spending we don't need. So what I've done is I've called for a 5-year freeze on annual domestic spending. And that freeze would cut the deficit by more than $400 billion over the next decade. And it will bring that kind of spending to a lower share of our economy than has been true for the last 50 years. To achieve those savings, we proposed eliminating more than 200 federal programs. We're freezing the salaries of hard-working civil servants for the next 2 years. We're finding ways to save billions of dollars, tax dollars, by selling, for example, 14,000 government properties that we don't need anymore. And that's just a start. If we're serious about tackling our long-run fiscal challenges, we're going to have to cut excessive spending wherever we find it. In defense spending, in spending on entitlements, spending through tax breaks and loopholes. And I'm going to be sitting down with Democrats and Republicans to figure out how we can reduce our deficits. But I want everybody to understand, our job is not just to cut. Even as we find ways to cut spending, what we can't do is cut back on investments like education. We can't sacrifice our future. Think about your family. Let's say something tough happens. If somebody gets laid off in the family, or you have a medical emergency, if you're a family that has to cut back, what do? The first thing you do is you give up things you don't need. So you give up vacations, maybe you eat out a little bit less, maybe you don't buy as many new clothes, maybe you don't buy that new car that you thought you needed. But the last thing you give up on is saving for your child's college education. children have the books they need, the computers they need. Because you know that's going to be the key to his or her success in life over the long term. Well, the same thing is true for our country. When we sacrifice our commitment to education, we're sacrificing our future. And we can't let that happen. Our kids deserve better, our country deserves better, and over the course of March, what we're calling Education Month around the White House, I'm going to be traveling the country. Arnie's going to be traveling the country. And we're going to be talking to parents and students and educators about what we need to do to achieve reform, promote responsibility, and deliver results when it comes to education. And I decided to come here to Miami Central to kick off Education Month because you're doing what I challenged states to do shortly after I took office. And that's turning America's lowest performing schools around. This is something that hasn't received as much attention as it should, but it could hardly be more important to our country. And right now, there are about 2,000 high schools in America, about 12% of the total number of high schools in America, that produce nearly half of the young people who drop out of school. You got 2,000 schools, about half the dropouts come out of those 2,000 schools. And we know these schools are often found in rural areas or in big cities like Miami. Many of these schools have lots of Haitian Americans and African Americans, Latino and other minority students. And Miami Central used to be one of these schools.
Yeah, used to be.
Used to. But it's important for us to remember where we've been so we know where we need to go.
Yeah.
I mean, this used to be a place where the problems on the streets followed kids into the classroom. It was hard for young people to learn, where the dream of college was out of reach for too many, where there was a culture of failure that brought everybody down. Now, turning around these schools isn't easy. A lot of people used to argue, well, all they need is more money, but money is not alone going to do the job.